Before I earned the scar that mirrors my mentors, I thought evil was something you cast out. I learned from a little girl with a black locket that the most dangerous evil doesn't want to possess you. It wants to infect everyone you love. My education began the day Monsignor Finch told me my untainted faith was the only weapon he had left, sending me into a sick house to face a darkness that was waiting to replicate itself in me. The air in Monsignor Alistair Finch's study was thick with the scent of old paper, beeswax, and something else, a faint antiseptic tang that I couldn't quite place. It was a room of shadows, the late afternoon sun barely piercing the heavy damask curtains. He didn't turn on a lamp. I think he preferred the gloom. It suited him. "You are ready, Michael?" His voice was a low, urgent whisper that seemed to be swallowed by the shelves of books around us. He didn't look at me, but at the tumbler of amber liquid in his right hand. His left hand rested on the polished mahogany of his desk, and my eyes were drawn to it, as they always were. It was a ruin. From the wrist to the knuckles, the skin was a puckered, waxy landscape of scar tissue, the color of old parchment and marbled with angry pink. It looked like a chemical burn, but I knew better. It was a testament, a warning etched in flesh. He saw me looking. "These are not suggestions, Michael," he said, finally turning his gaze to me. His eyes were tired, ancient. "They are not diocesan guidelines for dealing with the mentally disturbed. They are the rules of contamination. You do not break them for your survival. You obey them to prevent the sickness from spreading, to prevent it from taking root in you." He leaned forward, the shadows carving deep hollows into his face. "Listen to me. Listen as if your immortal soul depends on it. Because it does." He held up one finger of his good hand. "First, never meet its gaze for more than 3 seconds. The eyes are not windows to the soul, Michael. They are doorways. You hold its stare for too long, and you're not just looking at it, you're holding the door open for it." My own eyes flickered away from his, a reflexive flinch. I thought of every pastoral class I'd ever taken, every lesson on making eye contact to build trust, all of it useless. "Second," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "do not touch what it has touched. It leaves a residue, a spiritual filth. It's not something you can wash off. It's a cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. It finds the warmest parts of you and freezes them, one by one." He flexed his scarred hand, a gesture of phantom pain. "Third, speak only the Latin rite, not a word of English, not a single prayer from your heart. Your own words, your own thoughts, they are hooks it can grab onto. They are a weakness it can turn against you, twist into a weapon, and beat you with. The rite is a shield, ancient, impersonal, safe." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. My faith had always felt personal, a conversation between God and me. Finch was telling me that conversation was now a liability. "Fourth, if it sings your name, you fill your mind with prayer. The Pater Noster, the Ave Maria, anything. Drown it out. When it uses your name, it's not just making a sound. It's weaving a thread from itself to your soul. Let it finish the knot, and it will pull you into the dark with it." A chill, entirely separate from the room's cool air, traced a path down my spine. I could almost hear it, a sweet, childish voice singing my name. "Michael." "And last," he said, his voice flat, absolute. "If the consecrated candles extinguish, the holy ground is broken. You do not relight them. You do not say another prayer. You do not hesitate. You flee." The finality of that word, flee, hung in the air between us. Priests didn't flee. We stood, we fought, we were shepherds. "Others have tried," he whispered, as if reading my rebellious thoughts. "Brave men, better men than you, Michael, no offense." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Father Genevieve is in a private ward at St. Jude's. He spends his days tracing symbols on the walls, symbols we don't recognize. He hasn't spoken a coherent word in 2 years. He listened too long." He gestured vaguely towards the window. "Father Thomas was sent home to his family. He lasted one night." Clawed his own eyes out, screaming about the faces in the dark. He looked, you see. He broke the first rule. My stomach churned. These weren't just stories. They were the fates of my colleagues, men I'd seen at ordinations and diocesan meetings. Finch's gaze fell once more to his ruined hand. The third was Father David, my partner, my friend. His voice cracked, a fissure in his granite composure. He felt pity. The girl seemed so small, so frightened. He reached out to comfort her. Broke the second rule. The thing that was touching her, it touched him back. He closed his eyes. The burn wasn't from fire. The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. I finally found my voice, a strained, thin thing. Monsignor, why me? I'm a novice. I was ordained 6 months ago. You have men with decades of experience. When Alistair Finch looked up, the weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a terrifying mixture of raw desperation and profound guilt. It was the look of a general sending his very last soldier into a battle he knew was already lost. Because it has burned through all my experienced men, he said, his voice ragged. It knows their strengths, their histories, their secret little vanities. It has learned them. But you are a blank slate. Your ignorance of this fight, your untainted faith, it's the only weapon I have left that it hasn't seen before. He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. I'm not sending you in there because I think you are the best man for the job, Michael. I'm sending you in because you're the only man I have left. And in that moment, I understood I was not a champion of God being sent to war. I was a clean cloth being used to wipe up a contagion, with the full knowledge that the cloth itself would be poisoned in the process. The drive to the Schmidt residence took 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime spent in the shadow of Monsignor Finch's rules. Each one was a stone in my gut. I clutched the worn leather of my ritual case, the familiar weight of the holy water, the stole, the crucifix, and the small book of rites offering a flimsy comfort. They felt less like the tools of a priest and more like the trinkets of a boy whistling in a graveyard. You could see the wrongness from the end of the block. The Schmidt house sat at the back of a manicured cul-de-sac, but it seemed to reject the cheerful suburban landscape around it. The other houses were painted in warm beiges and friendly blues. This one was a muted gray, the paint not just peeling, but looking like sunburnt skin flaking away from the clapboard. The windows were like vacant, cataract-filmed eyes. It didn't just look old, it looked sick. As I pulled to the curb, a smell hit me, carried on the breeze through my open window. It was faint, but deeply unsettling, a cloying sweetness of rot, like flowers left too long in a vase, undercut with the sharp, clean scent of ozone after a lightning strike. Life and death, decay and energy, all tangled into one nauseating perfume. The lawn was the final confirmation. While the neighbors' yards were lush and green, the grass around the Schmidt house was dead in a perfect, creeping circle spreading out from the foundation, as if the very stone was poisoning the earth it touched. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to steady my nerves, I walked up the cracked concrete path. Before my knuckle could even touch the wood of the front door, it swung inward. A woman stood there, silhouetted against a dark hallway. Eleanor Schmidt. Her face was a mask of sleepless terror. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot and darting, as if watching for threats in the periphery. Her skin had the pale, papery quality of someone who hadn't seen the sun or a solid night's sleep in weeks. "Father Corbin?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Thank God you're here." "Mrs. Schmidt," I began, trying to inject a pastoral calm I did not feel. "Aye. She's been waiting for you," she cut in, her gaze flickering towards the dark staircase behind her. A cold dread, separate from the Monsignor's warnings, began to bloom in my chest. "She knows my name?" Eleanor's expression crumpled. A tear escaped and traced a path through the faint lines on her cheek. "Not just your name, Father. She's been singing a song." She wrung her hands, the knuckles white. She recited it in a haunted whisper. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for the girl and the quiet boy. 4 to keep a secret deep. 5 for the promise you couldn't keep. The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. It was a nonsense rhyme my grandmother used to sing to me when I was a child, a little chant we'd made up together while planting marigolds in her garden. I hadn't thought of it in 20 years. I wasn't sure I could have recalled it if someone had put a gun to my head. Yet here it was, in this sick house, on the lips of a possessed child. Finch's 4th rule slammed into my mind. If it sings your name, it's weaving a thread to your soul. Eleanor gestured for me to come inside, and I stepped across the threshold. The warmth of the late summer day vanished, as if I'd stepped through a veil into a cellar. The air was cold, still and heavy with that same scent of rot and ozone. The house was a living mausoleum, suffocatingly quiet save for one sound. From upstairs, faint but clear, came the melody of the rhyme. It was hummed, not sung. A perfect, sweet, and utterly soulless tune, mathematically precise, without breath or warmth. My eyes were drawn to the staircase wall lined with family photos, a gallery of a happy life now corrupted. In the older pictures, a bright-eyed little girl with blonde pigtails beamed from a swing set, hugged a golden retriever, and blew out birthday candles. This was Annalise. But as I followed the photos closer to the present day, a chilling transformation unfolded. In a school picture from last year, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. But in the most recent one, a family portrait taken just a few months ago, the light was gone entirely. Her eyes were dark pools, and I had the sickening impression of looking at a photograph of something ancient and vast peering out from behind the small, familiar face of a child. "Where did this start?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, my gaze still fixed on that horrifying portrait. Eleanor didn't look at the photos. I don't think she could bear to. Her class went on a field trip to the old Blackwood Sanatorium before they tear it down. The kids were exploring, treating it like a haunted house. Her voice trembled. Annalise found something. She came home with it, said it was pretty. The humming from upstairs continued its flawless, chilling loop. "What did she find, Mrs. Schmidt?" Eleanor finally looked at me, her eyes pleading, searching for an absolution I was terrified I couldn't provide. "A pretty black locket," she said, her voice breaking. "Just a smooth, dark stone on a chain. She put it on the moment she got home." She gestured up the stairs, towards the source of that terrible, soulless song. The humming began that evening, and it hasn't stopped since. I left Eleanor Schmidt downstairs, a statue carved from fear, and made my stand in the upstairs hallway, the holy ground. I knelt and opened my case, the familiar click of the latches, a small, steadying sound in the oppressive silence. I set out the 4 consecrated candles, thick cylinders of blessed beeswax, placing them in a protective square just outside Annalise's bedroom door. As I struck the match, the first flame leaped to life, and the wrongness of this house pushed back. The flame didn't flicker. It thrashed, a wild, panicked thing fighting to exist. The other 3 followed suit, their light casting shadows that didn't just dance but seemed to writhe on the walls, stretching and contracting like grasping fingers reaching from the gloom. The scent of holy wax was immediately smothered by that sweet, rotting odor. My holy ground already felt like it was being besieged. Clutching my crucifix until the edges bit into my palm, I pushed open her door and stepped inside. The room was cold, unnaturally so, and meticulously neat. And in the center of it all, sitting perfectly straight on the edge of her bed, was Annalise. She was wearing a pristine white nightdress, her blonde hair brushed to a glossy sheen. She looked like a porcelain doll placed for display, beautiful and utterly lifeless. Her hands were folded placidly in her lap. Her eyes, however, were fixed on me. They were wide, unblinking, and held a darkness that seemed to drink the frantic light from the hallway. I forced myself to look away after 2 seconds, Finch's first rule screaming in my head. My gaze fell to her throat. There, against the pale skin of her neck, hung the locket. It wasn't ornate. It was a single, smooth piece of polished black stone, like a chip of solidified midnight. It didn't reflect the light. It seemed to consume it, a tiny, perfect hole in the world hanging from a simple chain. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was a performer on a stage, one never wanted, with an audience of one. Taking a breath that felt like breathing in ground glass, I began the rite, my voice shaking only slightly. Exorcism est, omnis immundus spiritus, omnis satanica potestas. The Latin felt like a shield, a wall of ancient, holy words I was building around myself. For a moment there was only the sound of my voice and the frantic sputtering of the candles in the hall. Then she spoke. Or rather, the entity spoke, using her voice, but stripping it of all warmth, all inflection. It was a perfect, melodic recitation. "You feel guilty about your grandmother, Michael," I faltered, the next line of the rite dying on my lips. My grip on the crucifix tightened. "The last time you spoke, you argued over something so stupid. You hung up angry. You told yourself you'd call her back the next day to apologize." The voice was soft, reasonable, yet it echoed not in the room but directly inside my skull. "But you got busy." And she died, waiting for the phone to ring. Her last prayer was for you, but her last thought was of your anger. A wave of cold washed over me, so intense it felt like my blood was turning to slush. It was the residue Finch had warned me about, a cold that came from within. I forced the words out, my teeth chattering. "Omnis incursio, infernalis adversarii." "And this?" the voice whispered inside my head, mocking my piety. "This uniform, these words you barely understand. Is this faith, Michael? Or is it just the grandest performance of your life? A way to make up for all the ways you feel you failed? A costume to hide the frightened little boy who just wants everyone to think he's good? Every secret insecurity, every doubt I'd confessed only in the deepest privacy of my own prayers was being laid bare, examined with cold, clinical precision. The attack wasn't loud or demonic. It was an intimate violation. I pushed on, my voice a raw prayer. Ergo Draco maledicte. The entity changed its tactics. The assault shifted from my past to my present, from my soul to my heart. "Your mother is home right now," Annalise's voice said, still terrifyingly calm. "She's in the kitchen making tea. She keeps spilling a little water, and it's frustrating her. She hasn't told you about the tremor in her left hand, has she? She hides it when you visit." A cold spear of terror pierced through my shield of Latin. How could it know that? I'd noticed it myself 2 weeks ago. A slight, almost imperceptible shake she'd dismissed as nothing. The perfect doll on the bed smiled, a slow, dreadful stretching of the lips that held no joy. "She thinks it's just age, Michael. It isn't." The voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial, almost seductive. It was the sound of a serpent offering an apple. Annalise's head tilted, and her dark, endless eyes found mine again. "She's worried. We can feel it from here. We want to help," it whispered. The use of "we" chilled me to the bone. "She wants to give this to you. A gift. From our family to yours." The threat against my mother hung in the air, a poison gas I couldn't help but breathe. My shield of Latin was shattered, my focus destroyed. All I could see in my mind's eye was her face, her hand trembling as she reached for a teacup. The entity had found the perfect weapon. Not my fear for myself, but my love for another. I stood frozen, the crucifix in my hand feeling as useless as a child's toy. And then the mask cracked. The slow, dreadful smile on Annalise's face faltered. The ancient darkness in her eyes seemed to recede, like a tide pulling away from the shore, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the girl from the photographs. A tremor ran through her small frame. The porcelain perfection fractured, and a single, genuine tear welled in the corner of her eye and rolled down her cheek, a hot, human thing in that soul-freezing room. Her voice, when it came, was no longer the soulless, melodic instrument of the entity. It was a choked, desperate whisper, ragged with a pain that felt terrifyingly real. It was the voice of a child trapped behind her own eyes. "Father, help me." The words were a physical blow. They were a plea, not a threat. "It's wearing my face," she whimpered, the tear tracing a path to her jaw. It shows me what it does. It makes me watch." My heart, which had been a block of ice in my chest, cracked wide open. This was the true horror. Not just possession, but a conscious imprisonment. Annalise was a spectator to her own violation, forced to watch as this thing wore her skin, used her voice, and twisted her image into a vessel of despair. Finch's warnings, the cold logic of the rules, all of it began to feel distant, academic. In front of me was a suffering child. My priesthood, my very humanity, screamed at me to offer comfort. The entity, with diabolical cleverness, sensed its advantage. It didn't wrestle back control with force, it guided the plea. Annalise's tear-streaked face looked up at me, filled with a desperate, cunning hope. "You can cast it out," she whispered, her voice gaining a strange new clarity. "You have the power, but it's too deep inside me now. If you force it out, the shock will destroy the vessel. It will kill me, Father. You'll save my soul, but my mother will be burying my body." The dilemma was a perfect trap, a blade sharpened on the tenets of my own faith. "But there's another way," she pressed, her voice urgent. "It's strong, but I'm still here. I can fight it. Help me fight it from the inside." She extended a small, pale hand toward me. It trembled, not from cold, but from what looked like a profound effort. "Take my hand, Father, please. Don't leave me alone in here with it. Share the burden, just for a moment. Lend me your strength. Share the burden." The words were a perversion of everything I believed in, twisted into a temptation of pure compassion. My mind screamed Finch's rules at me. "Do not touch what it has touched. It leaves a residue." I saw his scarred hand, a permanent monument to a moment just like this one. But then I looked at her hand, so small, so helpless. The rules were for fighting a monster, but could I condemn a child to save myself? All it wanted was a hand to hold. A moment of comfort. A shared strength. It felt less like a violation and more like an act of grace. The conflict tore me apart. For a paralyzing second, I stood rooted to the spot. Then, with a quiet prayer for forgiveness, I made my choice. Pity won. I took a single step forward, my own hand outstretched, breaking the sanctified space I had created. The air grew thick, electric. As my fingers drew closer to hers, reaching across the chasm of damnation to offer a single foolish touch of solace, the world ended. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a gentle puff of smoke. The 4 consecrated candles in the hallway didn't just go out, they shattered. A simultaneous pop hiss echoed down the hall, spraying hot, consecrated wax like shrapnel against the walls and floor. The frantic, holy light was instantly, violently annihilated. The holy ground was not just broken, it was obliterated. The room was plunged into an absolute, crushing darkness that felt solid, a physical weight pressing in from all sides. The cold was no longer a sensation, it was the very substance of the air. And in that total blackness, Annalise's pleading, childish whisper was gone. It was replaced by a sound that vibrated up from the floorboards, through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. It was a laugh. Deep, resonant, and impossibly ancient. It was a sound of pure, triumphant victory, vast and utterly devoid of humanity or any emotion save for a contemptuous amusement. Rule 5. If the consecrated candles extinguish, flee. Primal terror erupted in my chest, overriding every thought of prayer or defiance. I spun around and scrambled blindly for the door, the sound of that monstrous, victorious laughter chasing me, echoing through the defiled house as I stumbled down the stairs and into the night. I don't remember driving back to the rectory. I only remember the aftermath, sitting in a hard-backed chair in Monsignor Finch's study, the same room where he'd given me the rules, now the scene of my utter failure. The taste of that ancient triumphant laughter was still in my throat. I had broken the rules. I had touched what it touched, listened to its temptations, and in my foolish pity, I had shattered the holy ground and let the darkness win. I told Finch everything, my voice a hollow monotone, the words falling like dead things into the silence. He didn't rebuke me. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just listened, his scarred hand resting on his desk, the waxy flesh a silent testament to the price of the compassion I had so cheaply offered. When I was finished, he made a single phone call. An hour later, the cavalry arrived. It was not what I expected. Father Julian Gray did not look like a warrior of God. He was a thin, severe man with wire-rimmed glasses and a lean, ascetic face that looked like it had spent more time in a library than a church. He moved with a quiet, academic precision, and his eyes, magnified by his lenses, held a detached, analytical coldness. He shook my hand with a grip that was surprisingly firm and dry. He carried a heavy briefcase, not of leather, but of a hard, dark, composite material. "Father Gray is a specialist," Finch said by way of introduction, his voice weary. "From an office whose name you don't need to know. His field is specific. Theological contaminants and parasitic entities." Gray set his briefcase on Finch's desk and opened it with 2 clean clicks. My stomach tightened. Inside, there were no extra Bibles or larger crucifixes. The case was lined with a dull, heavy-looking padding, and its contents were nestled in custom-cut foam. There were files, yes, but also glass vials, lead-lined containers, and a set of polished instruments that looked unnervingly surgical. This was not a priest's kit. It was a hazmat kit for the soul. "Describe the object," Gray said without preamble. His voice was a calm, dispassionate baritone, the voice of a lecturer, not a pastor. I described the locket, the smooth, polished black stone that seemed to drink the light, the simple chain, the profound cold it radiated. Gray listened, his expression unchanging. He didn't seem surprised or horrified. He seemed to be confirming a diagnosis. He nodded slowly, then turned to Finch. "It's a phylactery of sorrows. I've only seen 2 others. One was pulled from a mass grave in Cambodia. The other was in a collector's vault in Geneva." He turned his analytical gaze back to me. "This object is not jewelry, Father Corbin. It is a vessel, a spiritual trap. Think of it like a sponge, created in a place of overwhelming sudden misery. It soaks up the psychic echo of a consciousness, usually a powerful and malevolent one, and holds it in stasis." He gestured toward the window, in the direction of the Schmidt house. The Blackwood Sanatorium was built over a plague pit from the 1890s. Hundreds of people thrown into the earth, their last moments a symphony of terror, pain, and despair, a perfect crucible to forge such an object. "So it's a possession," I said, the word feeling inadequate. "No," Gray corrected me sharply, a flicker of professional impatience in his eyes. "Possession is a blunt instrument, a hijacking. This is far more insidious. This entity doesn't want to possess, it wants to replicate. It's a parasite, and it seeks to spread its own consciousness." He began to pace, his steps measured and deliberate. "It imprints upon a host, someone vulnerable, like a child. It then uses the host as an anchor to create an emotional nexus. It feeds on despair, terror, and grief. It doesn't just cause these feelings. It farms them. It learns its victims, finds their deepest fears and their most profound loves, and it uses them to generate the precise frequencies of misery it needs to grow stronger." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The whispers about my grandmother, the threat to my mother. It wasn't just a psychological attack, it was cultivation. "Its goal is to draw others in," Gray continued, his voice dropping. "Family, friends, priests. It infects them with its hopelessness, turning their own despair into a bridge. With enough bridges, it can create a new anchor, a new phylactery, without ever leaving the first. It wants to turn your entire community into a garden of its own sorrow." Finch, who had been deathly silent, rose from his chair. "We need to see the house." We drove back to the cul-de-sac, the three of us in Finch's car. We didn't get out. We just parked across the street, watching the sick house as twilight bled across the sky. It looked even more menacing now, a black tumor on the suburban landscape. "It knows we're here," Finch murmured. As he spoke, a light came on in the upstairs window. Annalise's window. A small, pale face appeared, looking down at us. It was her. The same doll-like stillness, the same dark, empty eyes. It watched us for a long, chilling moment. Then, something impossible happened. As we stared, her face began to shift. It wasn't a sudden change. It seemed to melt, the features rippling and flowing like warm wax. The childish chin softened, the nose reshaped itself, the brow smoothed. The hair at the temples seemed to gray and thin. In the space of 3 horrifying seconds, the face in the window dissolved and coalesced into a new one. It was the face of my grandmother. She smiled down at me from the window of that damned house. It was her smile, the one I had cherished my entire life, but there was no love in it, no warmth. It was a cold, dead, knowing smile, a smile that said, "I have what you love most. And I am waiting for you." The vision of my grandmother's face, cold and mocking in that upstairs window, broke something inside me. It was no longer a theological problem or a distant horror story. It was an invasion. It had burrowed into the most sacred corners of my memory and was now wearing them like a puppet. Beside me, Monsignor Finch let out a low, guttural sound, a mix of fury and despair. Father Gray simply watched, his expression grim, his analytical calm finally showing cracks. "It's escalating," Gray said, his voice tight. "It's no longer just testing defenses, it's laying siege." There was no more discussion, no more planning in the safety of the car. We were past that. We were 3 men walking into a storm. We got out of the car and crossed the street, our footsteps echoing in the unnervingly quiet cul-de-sac. The front door was slightly ajar, a dark mouth waiting to swallow us. The moment we stepped across the threshold, the assault began. The air wasn't just cold anymore, it was thick and heavy, like trying to breathe through wet wool. The scent of sweet decay was overpowering, so cloying it coated the back of my throat. I saw Gray's jaw tighten as he fought a gag reflex. The walls of the hallway seemed to sweat a thin, oily film that glistened in the weak light from the open door. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a digestive tract, and we were being consumed. We ascended the stairs together, a grim procession. Finch led, his good hand clutching a large, old crucifix, his scarred one held stiffly at his side. Gray was in the middle, his hard case held in front of him like a shield. I came last, my own crucifix feeling small and foolish in my trembling hand. Each step upward felt like wading deeper into a swamp of pure malevolence. We reached the hallway, the scene of my earlier failure. The shattered remnants of the beeswax candles were still scattered across the floor, the wax hardened into pale, broken shapes on the dark wood. Annalise's door was wide open. The room beyond was a pit of shadows. As we crossed the threshold, the entity unleashed its full power. It didn't bother with subtlety now. It launched a war on 3 fronts. Its voice, Annalise's voice, but multiplied, layered, filling the room from every direction at once, a cacophony of personalized despair. To Finch it spoke in the voice of his dead partner, a voice I'd never heard but recognized instantly from the agony that twisted the Monsignor's face. "You left me to burn, Alistair," the voice rasped, full of spectral pain and accusation. "You felt the heat and you ran. You were weak, you always were. You saved your hand, but you sacrificed my soul." Finch stumbled, his face ashen, his crucifix shaking. To Gray, it didn't use words. It used knowledge. I couldn't see what he saw, but his eyes went wide behind his glasses, and he let out a choked cry. I felt a psychic splash from the attack, visions of his meticulous research, his scholarly articles, his academic work, all being used for horrific ends. I saw images of his theories being twisted by dark regimes to psychologically torture prisoners, his understanding of spiritual contaminants used to engineer new forms of terror. It was turning his greatest pride into his greatest shame. To me, it brought my fear to life. It didn't just tell me my mother was in danger. It projected a vivid sensory illusion directly into my mind. I was no longer in the room. I was standing in her kitchen, smelling the familiar scent of cinnamon and dish soap. I saw her at the counter, her back to me. I saw her hand tremble, saw her reach for the edge of the counter to steady herself. I saw her face go slack, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. I saw her collapse, her teacup shattering on the tile floor. I felt her terror, her pain, and her last, desperate, fading thought was my name. Michael. I screamed, the sound torn from my throat, the illusion so real I could feel the cold of the kitchen tile under my own feet. The cacophony of voices ceased, the illusions vanished. We were left reeling in the dark room, 3 men staggered and gasping. The entity had shown us our deepest wounds. Now, it offered the salt. Its voice became a single seductive whisper that seemed to speak to each of us alone. But it doesn't have to be this way. To Finch, it offered a chance to rewrite his greatest failure. One touch, Alistair, you can pull him back from the fire. To Gray, it offered the ultimate prize. You've only read the footnotes. I can show you the original text, the knowledge you crave, a truth no other scholar has ever seen. But its full attention, its most potent temptation, was saved for me. The locket on Annalise's chest began to pulse with a soft, internal light, a dark and hungry glow. You can't get to her in time, Michael, the whisper slithered into my mind, gentle and full of pity. The doctors will be too late, but you don't need them. The pulsing glow of the locket intensified, drawing my gaze. The power that can cause the stroke is the same power that can unmake it. Just take the locket. Accept its gift. It wants to be yours. Take it and you can be her miracle. You can rewrite it all. The offer hung in the silent room, a shimmering, venomous promise. You can be her miracle. The image of my mother collapsing on the kitchen floor was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Every instinct, every fiber of my being as a son screamed at me to accept. To take the power, save her, and damn the consequences. I saw Finch wrestling with the ghost of his partner, his face a mask of agony. I saw Gray, the stoic scholar, trembling as he fought against the lure of forbidden knowledge. The entity was pulling us apart, isolating each of us in our own custom-made hell, on the verge of breaking us. It was Finch who broke the spell. With a roar of pure, defiant rage, he lifted his crucifix. "Get behind me, both of you," he bellowed, his voice no longer that of a weary administrator but a warrior. "Its power is in division. Stand together!" His cry cut through the psychic fog. I shook my head, the vision of my mother receding, leaving behind an aching grief. We instinctively moved closer, forming a tight triangle in the center of the room, our backs to one another, facing the oppressive darkness. "The locket," Gray said, his voice strained but clear. "It's the anchor, the nexus. We can't banish it while the phylactery remains. It has to be physically destroyed." An agonizing choice hung in the air. Destroy the locket and save the world, but risk destroying whatever was left of Annalise's soul tethered to it. The entity's earlier threat echoed in my mind. If you force it out, it will destroy the vessel. "I'll do it," I said, the words tasting like ash. The entity's focus was on me. Its hooks were deepest in my heart, my fears, my love for my mother. If anyone was going to get close, it had to be the one it was actively trying to seduce. Finch and Gray were its distractions. I was its prize. They didn't argue. They simply nodded, a grim understanding passing between us. They began to pray, their voices rising in unison, a wall of Latin built not to attack, but to shield. Sancte Michael Arcangele, defende nos in proelio. Their prayer was the distraction now, the spiritual cover fire for my advance. I took a step forward, out of our small circle of faith and into the cold, oppressive territory of the enemy. As I approached the bed, the entity shifted its tactics one last time. It dropped all pretense of power, all seductive whispers, all terrifying threats. The oppressive, ancient evil receded, and the being on the bed seemed to shrink. It became, with flawless, heartbreaking precision, a terrified little girl. Annalise, or the perfect image of her, scrambled backward on the bed, her eyes wide with genuine-looking fear. She clutched the locket to her chest, as if it were her only worldly possession, a beloved doll she was trying to protect from a bully. "No," she sobbed, her voice the fragile, breaking sound of a frightened child. "Please, don't. You don't understand." Tears streamed down her face, catching the faint, hungry light from the locket. "It's not just a thing. It's what's holding me together. It's where I hide from it. If you break it, what's left of me will break with it." Her voice dropped to a desperate, final plea. "I'll be gone forever, Father. Please." My soul twisted. This was the most diabolical trick yet. It wasn't holding her hostage with fear, but with love. It was using the last vestiges of her own identity as a human shield. To destroy the monster, I had to appear to be destroying the little girl. I looked at her, at the tear-streaked face, the pleading eyes, the trembling form, and for a moment I faltered. But then I looked deeper. I looked past the mask. I forced myself to hold her gaze for that 1, 2, 3-second count, and I saw it. Beyond the performance, beyond the terrified child, there was nothing. No soul, no fear, no girl named Annalise. There was only a cold, endless, and ravenous void, an ancient, patient emptiness, waiting to consume everything I was. "May God have mercy on your soul, Annalise," I whispered, my prayer a final goodbye to the girl who was already gone. Then I lunged. I ignored her shriek, ignored the small hands trying to push me away. My focus was on the locket. I grabbed it with my bare right hand. The moment my skin touched the stone, the world ended in a flash of non-light. It wasn't cold. Cold is merely the absence of heat. This was an anti-energy, a searing, absolute zero, that didn't just freeze my flesh but felt like it was freezing my soul. But the physical sensation was nothing compared to the psychic backlash. I was no longer Michael Corbin. I was the entity. 1 billion years of its existence crashed into my consciousness in a single, eternal second. I felt its silent, cosmic screaming in the void before creation. I felt its ravenous, insatiable hunger for warmth, for life, for feeling. I felt its seething, intellectual hatred for the messy, vibrant, loving light of humanity. And beneath it all, I felt its true, secret nature, an agonizing, crushing, and infinite loneliness. The weight of it was too much for a human mind to bear. A raw, animal scream was torn from my lungs as I ripped the locket from her neck. Fueled by a final, desperate surge of will, I slammed the phylactery down onto the hardwood floor with all my strength. It shattered not with a crack, but with a silent inward implosion, turning instantly to a fine gray dust that settled on the floorboards. The moment the locket turned to dust, the pressure in the room vanished. It was as if a sound too low to hear had suddenly stopped, leaving behind a profound and ringing silence. The oppressive cold dissipated, and the normal, mundane warmth of a late summer evening began to seep back into the room. The fight was over. Annalise, her eyes rolling back in her head, collapsed onto the bed, a puppet with its strings finally cut. She was breathing, she was free. But victory felt hollow, tainted. I was on my knees, gasping, the psychic shriek of that ancient consciousness still echoing in the ruins of my mind. My right hand was on fire. I looked down at it, cradling it to my chest. The skin from my wrist to my knuckles was already changing, turning a pale, waxy white, puckering as if it had been flash-boiled from the inside out. A mirror image of Monsignor Finch's hand. The price of contact. The mark of my contamination. Finch was at my side instantly, helping me up, his gaze falling from my face to my newly scarred hand with a look of deep, shared sorrow. Father Gray was kneeling beside Annalise, checking her pulse. His clinical demeanor returned. "She's stable," he announced, "profoundly weak. She'll sleep for a day, maybe more." Later, after the Schmidt family had been reunited in a quiet, tearful scene of disbelief and relief, we learned the truth of the entity's final, cruelest trick. A call to my parish confirmed that my mother was fine. She had, however, felt a dizzy spell that afternoon. She'd steadied herself on the counter, and it had passed. A minor dip in blood pressure, nothing more. A cruel coincidence the entity had sensed across the town and magnified into a weapon of devastating emotional power. The relief I felt was immediate, but it was tainted, like clear water mixed with a single drop of poison. I could never fully trust my own senses again. Annalise woke up 2 days later. The victory was not clean. She was left with a profound memory gap, a merciful but hollow emptiness that stretched from the day of the field trip to the moment she woke in her own bed. To her, the locket, the humming, the priests in her room, none of it had ever happened. She had lost weeks of her life, and in their place was just nothing. Her parents saw it as a blessing. I saw it as a final, subtle scar left by the entity, a theft that could never be repaid. A week later, I was back in Finch's study. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, but the room felt no warmer. He didn't offer me a drink. Instead, he slid a single, typewritten page across the desk. At the top it read, "Post-exposure protocols." It wasn't a list of rules for fighting. It was a list for living with the aftermath. "You're different now, Michael," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He looked at my scarred hand, then at his own. "You've touched the void. It leaves an echo. You'll feel things, see things." The list was short, practical. Instructions on how to ground myself in prayer when the memory of that billion-year scream tried to creep back in. How to recognize the difference between a true premonition and a psychic echo. A phantom pain left behind by the entity's manipulation. How to pray not for deliverance but for fortitude. It was a survivor's guide. I am forever changed. I see the world through a new, terrible filter. Finch was right. I now feel the residue that consciousness leaves behind. It's a cold spot in an otherwise warm room. It's a flicker of utter hopelessness in a stranger's eyes on the street. It's a subtle fragrance of decay on the wind where something bad is about to happen. My faith is no longer a comforting blanket. It is a sentinel's watchfire, something I must tend to constantly to keep the encroaching darkness at bay. The story ends here, but my watch does not. I am standing in the nave of my own church, the late evening light casting long shadows from the pews. It's quiet, a place of peace. But as I look toward the votive stand, I see a lone parishioner. A woman I know is grieving the recent loss of her husband. She is weeping silently, her sorrow a palpable thing in the air. And from her I feel it, a familiar, unnatural cold. It's not the entity, not the same one. But it is the same kind of cold. It is the chill of a despair so profound it is creating a crack in the world. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that something is being drawn to that crack. Something hungry. I look down at my scarred hand. It is no longer just a wound. It is an instrument. A sensor. I realize my fight with Annalise's demon wasn't the end of a battle. It was a brutal, scarring initiation. I haven't just defeated a monster. I have been given the terrible, agonizing sight to see the hiding places of others. I am no longer just a priest. I am a watchman, forever scarred and forever vigilant, standing on a wall only I can see.